Hello, this video is a demonstration of the higher order programming environment. In this demonstration, I will be creating a simple feed reader applet. One of the key points of this video is the use of the semantic database to persist feed items. First, though, we're going to create the basic feed reader. To do this, we need to select the feed reader itself and the carrier list viewer receptors from the receptor chooser. We'll click on Add, and these two receptors are added to the surface. You'll also see that there is a blank list viewer that appears as a user interface control. To start off with, we will take the carrier list viewer and double click on it, and we're going to give this a window name of Code Project RSS Feed, and we're going to select the semantic type RSS Feed item. Notice how the carrier list viewer now has columns that are specific to that protocol, the RSS Feed item protocol. I'm going to resize this window a little bit so that we can see both the IDE and our UI controls simultaneously. Okay, now we can take a look at what the different protocols are that are being sent back and forth between the carriers by selecting View, Show Semantics. And we see that the carrier list viewer is sending a protocol called RSS feed URL to the feed reader. We don't really want this because even though the feed reader is paying attention to this protocol, we don't want the carrier list viewer sending it to the feed reader when we select an item, and this will make a little bit more sense later on. So in order to stop that particular path, we're going to right click on the carrier list viewer and disable that particular protocol. So we'll find RSS feed URL, uncheck it, and now we only have feed items going from the feed reader to the carrier list viewer. Next, we'll actually configure the feed reader. Double clicking on it, we will put in the feed name. This will be Code Project Articles, and the feed URL. And we'll hit save. And if we wait just a minute, we will see that the feed is queried, the response comes back, and these are the current articles that are listed in the RSS feed page for the Code Project articles. That was pretty simple. Now, what we'd like to do is, of course, when we double click on one of these items in the list, we'd like to actually view that article. So we'll come over to the receptor chooser, and let's check the web page viewer and add that receptor. Now again, you'll notice that the URL is being sent by both the RSS feed item in the carrier list viewer and by the feed reader itself. Now, we don't want this particular path from the feed reader to the web page viewer, because otherwise every single item we will be displaying that in the web page viewer. So we will right click on the feed reader and disable the URL protocol from being emitted by that particular receptor. So now we have the path that we want, and if we select a particular article, let's say ASP.NET MVC2 plugin architecture, we see that this page is now rendered in our page viewer. And this is a very simple viewer. You'll notice it has no toolbar, etc. It's just basically, here's the page. We can, of course, use a different receptor, the web page launcher, which would give us this page in our current browser window as a separate tab. So this is useful, but let's add a few more feed readers. we're going to add 4 more feed sources. So I'm just going to drop these receptors on here, and let's not worry about all of the different protocol messaging at the moment. It'll get a little messy, but we'll clean that up shortly. So I'm going to put 4 of these onto the surface. And let's clean it up a little bit. What we need to do here is disable both the URL and the RSS feed URL protocols from being emitted for each of these receptors. This will take just a sec, as we don't want these to be interacting with each other. And then, of course, we're going to have to do this with the first feed that we created here. We'll have to turn this off as well. Okay, this is looking a little cleaner. We can see that all of these feed items are going to the carrier list viewer. Now, let's see. It seems I actually added a web page launcher. I don't really want to do that, so I'll just drag this off the surface and remove it. So now we just need to configure these additional feeds. So this one we will configure for, I'm not sure how to exactly pronounce this, but this would be GigaOM. As I said, I'm not really sure how one pronounces that. This is the feed URL. And you'll notice that as soon as we configure it, it will start to interact and display items. We have the code project feed reader already configured. Next we will grab feeds from Wired, and then we will grab feeds from InfoWorld, and lastly we're interested in feeds from Ars Technica. So we will add that as the last item. And now you'll notice that we have all of these feeds in our list. So if we sort by publication date, you can see all the different feed sources and all of the items. Next, we would of course want to requery these feeds at a particular interval so that we can get up-to-date information as they're published onto the feed reader. We can do this with the interval timer. We'll add this receptor and put it down here, and then when we double click on it we can say we want these feeds updated every 30 minutes, and we use a particular protocol called the RSS feed refresh, which we know that the feed readers respond to. We'll hit save, and we can see that these protocols are being received by each of the feed readers. So every 30 minutes these will all now refresh. And we can make this view a little cleaner simply by turning off the show semantics. So here we have a basic feed reader viewer, and we can view the different feeds on a web page by selecting a particular line item in the RSS feed item control. Now this is all fine, but what we'd really like to do is persist these items so that we can query them later on and interact with them from the persisted database entries. So we're going to actually remove this carrier list viewer. We'll just drag it off the screen, and we're going to add our semantic database receptor. Now what we'll do here is we will tell the semantic database that we want to persist the RSS feed item protocol. Hit save, and we see now that, similar to the carrier list viewer earlier, the feed readers, when they emit the RSS feed item protocol, it is now going to the semantic database, and the semantic database will automatically persist it. So we can see that turning on the show semantics again. Now, something that happens here behind the scenes is that the semantic database, now that it knows what it's doing, queries the database, making sure that the tables for the RSS feed item protocol all exist. So this is one of the interesting aspects of the semantic database, is that it will create the persistence model, the tables and their fields, for you automatically as you describe to it what is needed, what it needs to persist. And currently the semantic database persists data in a relational database, and the higher order programming environment currently supports SQLite and MySQL. I'm sorry, not MySQL, Postgres. And I'll be adding SQL Server as well, and it's very easy to add additional support for other databases. And if you're the curious sort of person and you're interested in seeing what the semantic database is actually doing, we can add a carrier list viewer and a text display box as a receptor and actually see what messages are being logged by the semantic database. And again, this looks a little ugly at first. Lots of things that emit text messages. So we'll clean this up in a sec. But we can configure the carrier list viewer to receive a particular protocol called logger message. Now, you'll notice that the feed readers themselves emit logs, the semantic database emit logs, the feed reader, a subtype protocol is text, so all of these feed readers also send text messages, and we don't really want this particular behavior. So what we're going to do next is place the text display, logger, message, carrier list viewer, and semantic database into a membrane. And once we do this, this becomes an isolated unit, and then we will double-click anywhere on the membrane and enable the RSS feed item as an input such that the membrane is permeable to signals, to signals, semantic structures, if you will, permeating into the membrane. This rewires the feed readers to the semantic database. We also don't want the semantic database to output text directly to the logger, so we'll disable that protocol. And now we have the ability to log SQL statements that the semantic database is emitting, and then we can view in an actual text UI what those SQL statements are. So let's take a look at that by simply, for example, we will manually reactivate the code project feed reader that emits logger messages, and in our log UI we can now see what's happening. Let's pick something interesting. So here is, for example, an insert statement. If we double click on this, the message portion, which is a text semantic type, will be sent to the text display. And here is a somewhat more readable version of what that SQL statement looks like. So, being happy with this, let's wrap all of this except let's take the web page viewer off the surface actually. We can wrap all of this into a membrane. So this becomes a nice little computational island. So we're done with this for the moment, so let's just move it off the screen a little bit so that we can work on the next part. For the second half, we are going to create another computational island in which we will actually have a more useful way of presenting the feed items than in a list. It'll look very list-like, but it'll offer a few other features. And so here we're going to add a feed list viewer. We're going to add another semantic database receptor. We're going to add a signal creator, and I'll explain why we're doing all this in a little bit. Another interval timer and a web page Now let's use a wedge page viewer again because it just makes it easier to demonstrate rather than dragging a browser into this window here. So we click on Add, and now we have these receptors, and they're actually doing things right away. Not exactly what we want to have happen. I could have hit the pause button up here to prevent this kind of activity. But here's a more useful RSS feed item UI control. It allows us to select how many items we want to load. We can create categories and bookmark feeds with a particular category and a note, and then we can query our bookmarks later on. So let's wire this all up so that it's actually functional. So I'm going to move these guys around a little bit so we can see what's happening. And let's take a look at our semantics briefly. Here again, we want to turn off the URL from the semantic database to the web page viewer, because the only thing that should be sending a URL to the web page viewer is the feed item list viewer. And we also note that we're already getting some information back and forth between the feed item list viewer and the database. In particular, this control queries the database for all of the different bookmark categories that currently exist. Now, the semantic database here, we want to tell it that we are going to persist certain semantic types. These include the URL visited, because we want to track which RSS feeds we visited. It includes RSS feed item displayed, because we want to track which items we have displayed, and also which items we have bookmarked. So now once we save this, we can see that there are additional protocols that are being sent from the feed item list to the semantic database. Next, we want this particular computational island, as I like to call them, even though it's not embedded in a membrane at the moment. We want to immediately load all of the feeds that we have in our database, and so for that we will use the signal creator to create a semantic type called query, and we're going to, for the data, put in the particular query that we want. In this case, we're going to say that we want the top 40 RSS feed items, and we want this joined with the URL visited and RSS feed item displayed semantic structures. The semantic database determines what the joins are for these different structures. So once we hit create, the query is emitted, and this database sends the items to the feed item list viewer, and in the item list viewer, we now see that these items are populated. You might have also noticed that there were some carriers, those little red triangles, that went from the feed item list back to the semantic database. That is the feed item list telling the semantic database to persist that these items have been displayed to the user. If we query this, the database again, we'll hit load. Anything that's been already displayed is now going to be returned in blue. And I'm going to turn off the show semantics for the moment, and we can look at some of the other behavior. So for example, here is an article, Numeric Integration at Compile Time. If I double click on this, we can view the article, and you'll also notice that items that we viewed are now displayed in green. We can, for example, also bookmark the item. So I can add a category here. Let's just call this numerics. And for the notes, we'll say compile time integration. And we will click on bookmark. The carrier goes off to the semantic database to store that information. We can then just show our particular bookmarked items by clicking on show. and they come back, and that's the only one for this particular category. I had created, for example, a test category called miscellaneous, and you can see that there's items under here, and when I select these items, the note updates according to what I had put in for that particular bookmark. Now the last step is we'd like the display to be updated at, let's say, every 10-minute intervals. So while over here the feeds are being requeried every 30 minutes, we will get an update within 10 minutes of any new items. And because they're new, they'll appear in white, and older items will appear in blue that we've already displayed. And as I mentioned before, bookmarked items will appear in green. I'm sorry, not bookmarked items, visited items. I haven't done any coloring for bookmarked items. But in any case, the particular protocol in the interval timer, let's first set that to 10 minutes, that we want to issue here is called resend. And resend is something that the signal creator listens to. And it is simply a protocol with no data. And when the signal creator receives this resend protocol, it resends the particular query. So we can just clean this up a little bit. And well, that looks like a nice little island. And we can just wrap this into a membrane so that it is isolated from any other computational structures and so forth, and signals and receptors that might be flying around if we add additional behavior and functionality. So there you have it. With just a few steps, we've created a nice and rather useful application for displaying feeds from different sources. That was very simple. Anyways, I hope you have enjoyed this presentation, and there is an accompanying code project article for this, which also goes into some of the behind-the-scenes implementation details. Thank you for watching.